Welcome to UO Today. I'm Steve Shankman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest is Janne Underriner, the Director of the Northwest Indian Language Institute in the Department of Linguistics. Janne Underriner earned her BS in psychology as well as her MA and PhD in linguistics at the University of Oregon. She teaches linguistics and trains teachers for the Institute. She's heavily involved in efforts to preserve Native American languages. She has consulted with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, with the Klamath tribes, the state of Montana, the Blackfeet tribe, and with Oregon Superintendent of Public Instruction, Susan Castillo. Janne writes and lectures widely on the threats to indigenous languages, and she's doing what she can to keep that threat at bay, although it's been pretty devastating so far, isn't it? Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Steve.
We want the people out there to know about this really important work in the region that we took over from the native people. You started off in psychology, and then you made the move to linguistics. How did that happen?
Well, that was kind of a long roundabout way of moving in a different discipline direction. I was very interested and did art therapy for a number of years, and was in the health field for about 16. And part of the work that I did towards the end of that was through vocational rehab and medical management, and ended up working with injured workers and putting people through ESL programs, and really liked the ESL programs and decided that was
English is a second language.
Exactly, and that was something that I wanted to do. So the U of O had a master's in applied linguistics, and I started the program, and in my last year of that, I had to take a seminar for linguistics, and it happened to be in the Klamath language. And I fell in love with the language. It was just phenomenal. Hadn't ever seen anything like that before, which then moved me into the theoretical part of linguistics and then language preservation. So, roundabout way.
Tell me, what was it that particularly struck you about the language that grabbed you, that was so transformative for you?
In being an English teacher here at the American English Institute here at AEI, and being at GTF there, I was used to English, and I had studied French and Spanish, and actually the language that I grew up with in my family was Swedish. So I was used to Indo-European languages, and seeing a language that was so rich in morphology and completely different in terms of no variations in word order, so no strict word order, and different word classes as we look at language and think of typical word classes, not finding adjective classes or prepositions, and just very, very different, but very rich in ways of expressing itself in verbal morphology. And I started studying older texts that were collected in the late 1800s and working on those, and then becoming more familiar with the body of literature really that exists in Klamath. And then all of a sudden I started being connected with the community of speakers that was remaining, and that's what opened it all for me.
But before we talk about that, I want to just ask a couple of questions. So, how much for you does the language and the quality of the language, I guess they call it the Whorfian hypothesis, how much about of the structure of language really does articulate a different attitude towards reality? Is that a romantic notion, do you think, or is there some truth in it?
I think there is truth in it. And I can say one thing from an elder Athabascan speaker who spent time with at a conference with me and said, you know what, if you can take anything away from this, it's how important verbs are to us, and how important expressing our actions with that are related to place and to land and our people and our heritage, and that really stuck with me.
And it comes through in the language.
And I think that was what was represented to me in Klamath, was that remarkable difference for me at that point. It was remarkable. It is remarkable, but for me it was my first introduction to that.
Could you let us know, let our audience know, there must have been lots and lots of native languages not too long ago
in Oregon,
in this area,
yeah,
in Oregon.
We know there's at least 25, maybe 30.
So there was a lot of linguistic diversity, and I think today We think of it, and you're the linguist, as, I mean, it seems to me, frankly, a rather, at least the white speech is rather bland. It may be the only region in the country that doesn't seem to have an accent. I don't know.
Oh.
Not true, huh? But then you had all these different, all these native languages, you know, lots and lots of verbal.
Well, if you consider the geography of the land, and you consider the different mountain ranges and the different river areas and the valleys, there essentially was a different language that was spoken at each crossing, really.
But we've lost that today, haven't we?
We have lost most of that.
And probably, I guess, with that, you've lost a feeling of specificity for the place. It's going to be very different.
That is what is lost with language, and that is what is so important when you speak with the native folks, the first people of this area, is that is why they want to be able to speak their language, because they feel in place. It's the place that knows that language and holds that language. And so that's a very important reason.
So tell us now about your initial work with the tribe. When did it begin? How did it begin?
Well, with the Klamath tribe, probably 1996. I was just finishing up, 95, 96, finishing up my master's thesis, and went down there and started learning about the community and was introduced to the speakers. And at that point, there was probably 5 or 6 language speakers of Klamath and Modoc remaining. And
that's it?
At that time, there was, yeah. First language speakers. And they had a language program in place pretty much for about 7 or 8 years. Gordon Bettles, who actually is now here and is the steward of the Longhouse, was the director of culture and heritage, and had started language preservation efforts before then. And another graduate student from our department had been down there and had helped with that in their efforts. And so that was my first link with them. And then over a period of 5 or 6 years, through grants that we were able to write together, that money was then available to start writing curriculum. And there was a kindergarten and a first grade program in Chiloquin Elementary School, and a culture language-based program that was in the high school, and culture camp in the summer that was 2 weeks.
Now these are things that were there before you got involved?
This is what happened then since 1996.
Yeah. So at the beginning in 1996 there were, did you say, like 6 or 7 native speakers? In other words, people for whom that was the first language, their first language. And then how many people speaking the language who had learned it as a second language?
I don't know that I can really say that, because a lot of community members didn't come forth to work with the language program. Gordon is the second speaker of Klamath. But honest, there was just there were a couple handfuls of people remaining at that point in time.
Now? And now?
Well, the last first language speaker passed away 2 years ago, September.
And what about, there must be more people now, though, who can't speak the language as a result of these efforts.
Well, there were 5 or 6 apprentices that went through the program that now have a better sense of the language, and kindergarten, first grade, second grade kids, who certainly know a number of words that they wouldn't have known had the program not been there.
So do you speak Klamath now?
Let's say I have a great linguistic appreciation for it, and I certainly had the opportunity to work with the elders. And there's words I can certainly say, but I would never call myself a speaker.
Can you say those words, or do you feel it's inappropriate for you to say them, just to give our audience some sense of what the language might sound like, even though you're not a native person yourself?
How about if I greet you?
Okay.
And a typical greeting in meeting somebody is waklisi. Which is, as we would interpret that, is how are you?
So what's the wa part?
Actually, wak is a interrogative marker. So it's more of what we call in linguistics a particle. It's not really
so you can't really translate
word.
it.
When you see walk, you know that you're talking about an interrogative not a declarative utterance, but I'm asking you a question.
Okay, so might I, or something like that. Cleasy.
Well, lease,
Walk,
well, okay.
leasy.
So, and then lease is a declarative particle. So if we were to look at walk, maybe we could interpret that as how, and lease is another interrogative particle, and E, the morpheme E, is the second pronoun, subject pronoun,
so
you.
that's you. So that's you. And,
So
and the
it's
walk
walk.
is, the walk means it's going to be a question.
Walk, yes, or in this instance, interpreted as how.
How are you?
Right, and then lease is this, what we call in linguistics a second position particle that means interrogative, and then E. So walk, lease, E, and when it's said, it's waklisi.
Waklisi,
Right.
waklisi.
And if you're well, Steve, you'd say modich.
Modich. And if you're not so good, did they say that?
Kaidich.
Or do most people say
Kaidich is,
Kaidich.
Which is like
So-so.
not well.
So tell us how you came then to found the Northwest Indian Language Institute.
Well, in being part of the community, there were a couple other graduate students that were, one was working with Warm Springs, and another one actually was working down with a Northern Paiute speaker, Yahuskin, with the Klamath tribes. And there had been a couple other graduate students in the past and that had worked with language preservation efforts. And the tribes had started coming to our department and saying, you know, there must be something that you can do for us, or we're not exactly sure what it is, but you have the expertise of linguistics and education. And so actually what happened in the spring of '98 is we had a first consortium here where the tribes from, number of tribes from Washington and all the tribes from Oregon came, and we talked all day about what was needed. And so we said, well, we've never done this before, we don't know how to do it, but let's start. And so we had our first Northwest Indian Language Summer Institute.
Wow. And when was that?
Summer of '98, July of '98.
Yeah. And these were different Indian peoples?
We had folks from Colville Reservation in Washington, Spokane, Umatilla, Warm Springs, Grand Ronde, Klamath. Boy, Steve, there were about 16 people. I'm sure I'm forgetting.
And before that time, there wasn't a lot of connection between...
No, it was graduate students going out and doing their field work.
I see, yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Scott Delancey had a connection with the Umatilla and the Warm Springs and the Klamath folks. And that was mostly through graduate students that were working with him that he helped locate.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is quite an extraordinary effort. I mean,
Well,
by
it
the
is.
university to
Absolutely, and
to
it's
be reaching out in ways that make all kinds of sense.
well, and it's the only effort actually that exists in our area at all. I mean, there's not really another training program like we have other than at University of Arizona.
So, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what is
You're
the
going
native?
to.
What is the percentage of what is the native population in the state of Oregon?
Oh
Do you
no,
know
that's
roughly?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, it's very small
Very small.
as opposed to Alaska or
Yeah.
California or Canada.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, if you're in an area of say, Klamath, so Klamath County, you know, it's a much higher population, but at that point I still don't think it's higher than 35 to 40%. And I think in the schools you mostly see about 25.
Yeah. So what kind of chances, realistic chances do we have to preserve a lot of these languages?
Well, I think that's the question is what is being preserved, or what is our notion of preservation? So when I started with the notion of language fluency, as we would consider language fluency in first and second language acquisition. And that has radically changed over the past years. Because what it really means is what it means to a population of people. So if you have one elder in your community, you know that you're not going to revive a community to speak the language, where as you and I greet each other on this,
Right.
we're at the store, or we're at the grocery, you know, the grocery store or the gas station or the restaurant, and we're in an environment where the language is being spoken around us. But if indeed what it is that we want to preserve are plant names and place names and colors and animal names and traditions and ceremonies and songs, then that's a very different type of language preservation than you know,
a living, fluent, living language.
So I think what is living in terms of language is defined by each community. Certainly not the linguist here.
So how is the Institute supported financially?
Well, through the past, we've been supported on by GTFs, by community members. There's a number of individuals.
Graduate teaching fellows. For
yes,
those
graduate
out in the
teaching
audience.
fellows. I was one for many years.
Yeah.
And when I graduated, actually, that became the question of, okay, so now the university can't really support the Institute as it had. What are we going to do? So a number of community members have stepped in and have helped with money through the foundation, so the foundation helps. For a year and a half, we had 2 years actually, a proposal that was funded by Spirit Mountain Community Fund to help with projects. The graduate school and the Dean of Graduate Studies and Research help support the Institute. Basically, though, we look for outside funding. And there's the hope that that will...
you continue to look for it.
We do, yes.
I guess it's difficult to find, in some ways difficult to find outside funding.
It is.
If you had a larger population and it were a wealthier population, I guess it would be in some ways easier to find benefactors.
Well, and if we had perhaps a government that really regarded the heritage,
as
language
important.
and culture is important, there would be more funding for that.
Well, have you gotten anywhere with, I'm sure you've tried to lobby the current, you're speaking about Salem, I mean the governor, for example. Wouldn't he, in theory, be sympathetic to this?
Actually, I haven't spoken with the governor. Our previous governor was very sympathetic to it. And a number of bills were passed and have made changes, including for us the Native American Languages certification, which then allows tribes to certify their teachers and be in the school system. And when Superintendent Castillo came in and her deputy, Pat Burke, have been very serious in supporting this, and such that we actually have a committee that meets monthly and is involved in policy making. And actually last year there was a number of various community members involved, including OPB and the archives and Oregon Culture. So there's a number of organizations that are indeed sincerely interested, but yet have no funding to be able to help support, but are certainly willing to write collaborative proposals.
Now, you offer language classes, don't you?
I do, actually.
Is it called Chinook Wawa?
It is. That's exactly.
And is it Sahaptin?
Sahaptin.
Sahaptin. During the summer workshop, you want to tell us something about these languages?
Well, because the teachers that come are either language learners or language speakers themselves, what we do is offer language classes based on the population of teachers that are coming. So the past couple of years we've had a number of community members from Warm Springs and from Umatilla and from the Yakima Reservation, and actually even down I guess that's up the Columbia River towards Umatilla. And really, actually, since '98, that's been a large population. And so being able to offer a language class for an hour or two a day for those folks is really important, because they leave their elder. You know, if they are learners of a language, then they leave their elder for the 3 weeks that they're here. So we wanted to make sure that they were still able to take their language classes with one of the elders. So Virginia Beavert, who is a Yakima elder and has taught Sahaptin for many years and is a professor of Sahabdin at Heritage University in Toppenish, is the Sahabdin language teacher.
So it's not you yourself, it's all
Well,
three
and
of
then
these.
there's a few of us that teach the Chinagwawa class, Henry Zink and Tony Johnson,
And again, who are the students in the class and how many are there?
it varies on, you know, there'll be a year when we have 25 students that come to Neely, and there could be a year when we have 7. So if there was a larger Klamath contingency that say would come up for a year, in fact, last year we had our own mini Neely for Klamath apprentices and teachers that came for 2 weeks and had language class and linguistics. It was all focused on the Klamath language. So what we try to do is focus on the groups that are coming and provide them with the language instruction that they'd be missing in their community for the 2 or 3 weeks that they're here.
So you're now helping to teach other people how to develop language programs, isn't that right?
Yes.
And so how do you do that?
Well, basically it's a lot of listening. Basically it's going out and listening to what the community wants, either helping develop a survey that would then be sent out to the community members to find out what the status of the language is and what is most needed in the community, and either helping then to organize in planning community language programs or an immersion preschool program or kindergarten or early primary or high school or
raising the awareness of the possibility that these languages can be kept alive in some kind of formal way, and I guess making people aware that it's possible.
Well, that's right. And I'll have to say, for Superintendent Castillo's office too, they've done a really, they're behind it 100% in terms of working with superintendents and school principals and really getting the awareness there that the state is behind the native languages being in the school system, and in particular high school. So high school students just don't have the choice of Spanish and French, or Spanish only in some cases, but could take their language.
So have some of the indigenous languages of Native Oregon people, I mean, obviously, I guess most of them have been lost, haven't they?
Yeah, they have.
So
we're talking
a
lot of them are sitting in the night library.
In the night library.
Dissertations or
but
books
nobody is speaking them
recordings
any longer.
Very few, actually.
And does that mean that the people are gone who spoke these languages? Is that also part of the problem, or and what I mean is the tribes themselves, those particular populations are gone. When the language is gone, does that mean those people no longer exist? Or could the people be there and somehow have lost touch with the languages of their heritage?
Well, you know, and I know you know this, but let me just try to phrase it differently. You know, before there was contact, there were people that lived in groups and spoke their languages and either knew their neighbor's language or didn't know their neighbor's language, or actually there were a number of speakers of Chinagwawa. So that was a common language. It was the lingua franca, certainly on the Northwest Coast.
I see.
So with contact then came the organization of government structures, tribal structures, sovereign nations, but tribal structures that didn't quite exist, or actually really didn't exist like that before contact.
I see.
So now when we work with groupings, it's not necessarily community members, it's tribes, tribal language programs. And so the tribes, say, at Grand Ronde is representative of 11 to 25 different groupings of people and languages, and Siletz, and Klamath is 3, and Warm Springs is 3. And so do those people still exist? A number of the first language speakers are gone. A number of first language speakers, family members, children or grandchildren, who went to boarding schools where You could not speak your first language. You had to learn and speak English. And they were taught that speaking their language was a very negative thing. Some of those people don't regard preserving and revitalizing the native language as a positive thing because of their experience.
Yeah, they've had it beaten out of them
They
in a
have.
sense. Yeah.
But does the essence of the language still live in the community? Very much so. The essence of the language and the culture lives in the community, even if English is the first language that's spoken.
So Chinookwah is the language that was, you say it was a kind of a lingua franca. So, so native peoples were speaking that and other languages as well.
Yeah, primarily up the coast, down the Columbia River, down the major routes like I-5, 97, up through Canada to the west side of the Rocky Mountains.
So it was in a sense, a multilingual culture.
Absolutely. I don't think any person that existed here spoke one language.
So, yeah. That's pretty, that's pretty extraordinary.
Well, but it's not, because the notion of being bi or multilingual, I think, is how the world, the people of the world are. I think what's unusual is America, where we speak one language.
Right. But I have to admit my own ignorance on this, that I somehow didn't realize that native people spoke many different languages, because when you look at these maps and you see all the different languages within such a fairly small area, it would make...
And different language families, totally different language families.
It would make communication very difficult if you didn't have a lingua franca to speak.
Or if you didn't know your neighbor's language, that's for sure. So you can have an Athabascan grouping of people living next to a Penutian grouping language, speakers, and it's very different languages.
Well, thank you, Janne, very much for being with us.
You're so welcome,
for a very enlightening half hour.
Thank you for inviting me.
We've been speaking with Janne Underriner, Director of the Northwest Indian Language Institute. Thanks very much for watching.